One more thought for Yom Kippur. How important Hesed is in the Jewish tradition in terms of ethical morality and how we're to live as individuals. How the Jewish tradition is all about people. There's a passage from the Talmud, tractate Sota. The Torah begins and ends with Chesed. And it then talks about how God clothes Adam in chapter 1 and buries Moses at the end of the Torah. And Maimonides picks this up and says that Milut Chasadim has to do with clothing the naked, visiting the sick, comforting the mourner, and hospitality in general. The Jewish tradition regards the verse, "And you shall love your neighbor as yourself," as the preeminent concept in the entire Torah. And again, all of the commentators say that the way one loves one neighbor is through Chesed and Gmilut Chasadim. The Jerusalem Talmud says that all commandments are equal to Chesed. And also in the Jerusalem Talmud it says, it quotes God as saying, "Would that my children would forget me and care for one another." That's the Jewish idea of God. God says, I don't need worship. I need people to take care of other people. There's this gorgeous Talmudic story told very often of a subject of how people came to a king, subjects come to a king, and ask the king, "How do we love you? What shall we say? What shall we bring?" And the king answers, "I am grateful for your goodness and your desire to show me love. But I do not need your words. I know the sentiments of your heart. I do not need your gifts. I have it all. If you would show love for me," says the king, "care for my children, whom I cherish with all my heart. If you would love me," God says in the Talmud, "go forth and love my children. Do milut chasadim for other people." This includes, by the way, Jew and non-Jew. In the Jewish tradition, God cares for people. And there's that classic line in the Midrash where the Egyptians are drowning in the Red Sea. They are the enemy. They were trying to capture, if not kill, the Jewish people. And they are drowning in the Red Sea, and in the Midrash, God is weeping at the Red Sea, saying, my children are in the sea." God calls the Egyptians my children, and he weeps for their destruction because they are human beings. Anyone who misunderstands the overall sentiment of the Jewish tradition when it comes to how Jews are required to treat the non-Jew has not been exposed to the Jewish tradition. On Yom Kippur especially, with the theme of Chesed, it's critical for us to leave this sanctuary understanding how the Jew embraces Jew and non-Jew. It says in the Torah, tzedek, tzedek tirdof. Justice, justice shalt thou pursue. And the rabbis ask, why was it necessary for the Torah to repeat the word justice? Couldn't it be once? Justice thou shalt pursue. No, the rabbis say, it's to emphasize to the Jewish people that justice must be done to the Jew as well as to the non-Jew. In the Midrash, Adam, the first person created, was created midrashically from the dust of the earth that God gathered from the four corners of the world. White, black, yellow, red. That's in the Talmud. Actually, it's in the Mishnah, the first level of the Talmud. That God goes to the four corners to gather the four colors of the universe. That no one race can say to another, ours is superior over yours because we came first. That is Midrashic Jewish rabbinic literature. A Jew is forbidden to see color. The Jew is colorblind. Mishnah Torah, written by Maimonides. The purpose of the laws of the Torah are to bring mercy and chesed and peace. Mercy, chesed, and peace to the world. That's the purpose of the Torah, as Moses Maimonides describes it. And in the 19th century, one of the great Rabbanim of our age, Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev, whether a man really loves God can be determined by the love he bears his fellow man. And it's finished in the 20th century by the greatest of all the modern Orthodox scholars, rabbis, teachers, Joseph Soloveitchik. There can be no Judaism, Soloveitchik writes, without morality. God may only be worshipped. A person can only involve in the ritual laws of Judaism if an individual first makes peace with his fellow man. In every instance, the Jewish tradition is clear and unequivocal. What comes first is how do we treat other people, and the way we treat them is symbolized in the symbol with kindness, with love, with comfort, with chesed. I don't know if you notice the passage we read when we take the Torah from the Ark. It's a very famous passage. You shall beat your swords into plowshares, your spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Most people know that passage from the book of Isaiah. We read it from the book of Micah. It's another prophet who says the exact same thing that Isaiah says. You shall beat your swords into plowshares, and everyone shall sit under vine and fig tree. None shall make them afraid. The same prophet, Micah, utters a line which is one of the most famous, again, of all the Jewish tradition. It has been told thee, O man, what is good, and what Adonai does require of you. Do you remember the three things that are required in the book of Micah, prophet Micah? To do justly, to love, and to walk mitsuyan, mitsuyan. Who did that? Very good. That's the way we hear it in our ear. One should always look at the Hebrew when one can. It's not what it says in Hebrew. English, do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with God. The word for mercy, by the way, in the Jewish tradition, really, you know it from Yiddish, rachmanis. You very often will hear in the liturgy and also in the Torah that God does things berachamim, with mercy. In Micah, the word is not rachamim. To do justly, to love chesed. Love acts of loving kindness. Micah is saying the ultimate in human behavior is justice, chesed, and to walk humbly with God is to understand that none of us is God, and that our job is to make the creatures in this world, human beings, as comforted and loved as possible, to do loving kindness, so that every man will live under vine and vine and fig tree. And there's a line that follows it that I find so intriguing. It's never quoted, but the very next line in the book of Micah, after it says, to live, everyone will live under vine and fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. For all peoples, Micah says, shall walk each in the name of their God, and we will walk in the name of Adonai, our God, forever and ever. There's an understanding in the Jewish tradition. Other peoples have other ways of relating to the divine in the universe. It's why the Jew never requires somebody to convert to Judaism. By being a Jew, one is no closer to God and has no better reward in heaven. The Jewish tradition asks all of us, Jew, non-Jew alike, just do chesed. And by doing chesed, all are equal. And the question is asked, is it in human nature? Is it in our nature to do chesed, or is it a stretch? Do only special people do chesed, or are all of us capable of chesed? In the Jewish tradition, there's a conviction that human beings have an enormous capacity to do good and to do evil. Human beings have that inside themselves because God gave us a Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara. It is interesting to note there is no duality of powers in the Jewish tradition. Judaism does not see our God in a fight against some kind of god of evil. Most pagan religions, early Greek religions, most Western religions, not really true of Eastern religions, but Western religions all believe that we are watching and part of a battle between good and evil in our world. That God versus the devil. For Judaism, it's inside us. And long before there was a Freud, the Jewish tradition was ultimately talking about the ego and the superego and the id. There are enormous drives in human beings expressed most I want a word for largely in male sexuality, which prompts the need for power and wealth and force of arms. And that drive also promotes a host of selfish goals, of selfish needs, and those are in both men and women. In most pagan religions, these drives are associated with the anti-God, with the forces of evil outside of good, perhaps best described in Christian theology by the Antichrist. The devil is the Antichrist. Satan is the Antichrist. There's Christ and Antichrist. And this goes back to early Greek pagan dualities of good gods and bad gods. And they're warring with each other, and human beings are supposed to pick sides. And it makes for some very good movies. Rosemary's Baby, The Exorcist. It's all about real forces which need to be exorcised, and people must stand up to Satan. That same mentality led to hanging and burning women who were thought to be witches beginning in the 16th century, or in the Salem trials of the 17th century, where 20 women were hung and burned because they were thought to be inhabited by the force of evil in this world, the Satan, the Antichrist. The Jewish tradition sees reality totally differently. Whatever the forces of good and evil are, they're inside us. And we have the ability, says the Jewish tradition, to channel every libidinous drive into socially constructive, appropriate, lovely, loving behavior. By the way, a very important part of the Jewish tradition is how the Jewish tradition views our thoughts. I am always struck, I'll always be struck by the notion that one must apologize for lust in one's heart. When one has to apologize for any emotion one feels, any thought one has, any dream one dreams, one would be apologizing all day long. The Jewish tradition says one is never held responsible for any bad thought or bad dream or bad fantasy. The only thing that ever matters to the Jewish tradition is how a person behaves. One can have all the fantasies in the world. If they are never acted upon, the tradition says there is no culpability. Incidentally, the tradition has what seems to be a contradictory position. Good thoughts, you get credit for. Bad thoughts, you're not held responsible for. The tradition seems to think that good thoughts in some way reinforce goodness in the world. They don't worry about bad thoughts. They come and go. And people have the right to feel good when they do something nice for someone else. Often you'll hear somebody say, well, you know, so-and-so is lovely because they're really doing it for themselves. It makes them feel good. The Jewish tradition says, good for them. Of course we're supposed to feel good when we do something good for someone else. Every act of kindness should bring us joy and should make us feel good about ourselves. And we should look for other ways to feel good about ourselves by helping other people. And lo and behold, there is a new area of science which seems to find and validate the Jewish tradition's view of the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara and what human nature is about. There's a new science that goes by the name of social neuroscience. I am not an expert in social neuroscience, but I want to tell you what I have found in this extraordinary new field, which basically says that human beings innately want to do the right thing. And if we don't, it's not because there's an evil inside us, it's because we've lost focus and missed opportunities. There's some fascinating work done by a renowned Jewish psychologist. His name is Daniel Goleman. He wrote a wonderful book, Emotional Intelligence. And after that, there was a portion of social science that was described, goes under the term now, EI, Emotional Intelligence. Daniel was born in 1946 in Stockton, California. Both of his parents were professors. His mother was in sociology, his father was in the humanities. He grew up in a Jewish intellectual home, and he went on to become part of this new discipline, a leader in the area of social neuroscience. And what's going on in our brain when we're interacting with someone else. It is now possible through modern medical science and tools to literally study what's happening in a person's brain when the person is interacting with someone else. And Goldman has found there is in our brain a psychological mechanism that physiologically operates when we're in a relationship with other people. This piece of our brain is called mirror neurons. There are mirror neurons in our brain which are activated when we interact with someone else. And they're called mirror neurons because they reflect the mood and the feelings of the person we are in relationship with. So that when we are in a relationship, we literally feel the mood of someone we care for. The example given is, how does a couple know when it's time for a first kiss? It's a sense they have through mirror neurons. And what EI science seems to show is that the default wiring we have is that we want to instinctively empathize with and reach out to in comfort to other human beings. To be empathetic is what this science shows. That empathy is our natural impulse that feels the pain of others and wants to comfort, wants to do gmilut chasadim. What science seems to be validating is at the heart of Jewish ethical conduct. The Jewish tradition has said over and over again, we want to feel the other person's pain. It becomes the basis of Jewish ethics. What is hurtful to you, don't do to your neighbor. Understand the pain of another human being and act out of that pain. It is also an enormously optimistic view of human nature and of people and what people can do for each other. And if one is asked, then why don't people do it? Why isn't Hesed just seen all around us? The answer in part is, it is. But Daniel Goleman has his own answer. It's when we lose focus. When we become preoccupied with ourselves. When our own interests, or simply the details of our day-to-day life, get in the way of our noticing the other person's pain. It's all about noticing, being aware, and seeing the other person's pain, being interested in the other person. Goldman talks about a new word that has been coined. The word is pizzle. They talk about pizzle. Pizzle is that moment when we are in conversation or in relationship with someone else and they take out their cell phone. That's the pizzle moment. All of a sudden, they're not with us. They're with a device. And for all of the benefits, the extraordinary benefits of social media, obviously an oxymoron, but for all of the benefits of social media, of Facebook, and of Twitter, and of Instagram, and of Snapchat, and of email, for all the good. The danger is we become preoccupied and we're not aware of even doing a pizzle moment. By the way, pizzle is a combination of puzzled and pissed off. Another test Goldman has. How soon does a person in conversation ever use the word you? At what point in a relationship does someone you're with pay attention to you? Ask you a question. Want to know how you are doing. Want to know how your life is going and how you feel. How long does that take? Goldman tells a story about a woman, a Jewish woman named, I think it was Jessica, a Jewish young woman in New York who came to the conclusion that the best test worthy for anyone for whom she would have a serious relationship was how early in their conversation did the person, the man, ask her about herself. Stopped needing to talk about himself, but wanted to know about her. And there's a story of how she found her husband. He was one who immediately wanted to know about her. And we all know Jessica is right. Whether we're a boy or a girl, we want the other person to be interested in us, in our soul, in who we are. It's what Martin Buber calls the I-thou relationship. Martin Buber, one of the great Jewish philosophers of the 20th century. We spoke last year about Mordechai Kaplan. Martin Buber is another one of the giants of Jewish theology, philosophy of the 20th century. And Martin Buber has this articulation that in life there is either the I-thou relationship or the I-it relationship, and that most of life is I-it. I-it is when we make the other person into a thing, to be manipulated, to be used, and therefore capable of being abused. I-it is never really personal. I-it is always about the I. Buber argues the world increasingly encourages people to engage in I-it. That the scarier life becomes, the more people try to protect themselves with the I-it relationship, in which there's protective distance. There's little chance of being hurt because one is not truly engaged. And the problem, of course, is there's also no chance for intimacy or for a true personal relationship. There's no opportunity for Hesed in the I-it. And then Buber describes the profound difference between I-it and I-thou. And he always writes it the same way, capital I dash capital thou. And what he's saying is, it's the dash that is the relationship between two real human beings. I-thou is without objectivity. No objectifying the other person in any way. It's when one is totally engaged in the relationship, when one becomes totally vulnerable. But one becomes bound in that moment of I-thou, bound in a moment of transcending intimacy, of trust, of validation, of Hesed, of love. Buber argues we all know these moments. We know the moments when we have felt there's no one else in the world except the two of us. We understand what he's saying because we've all experienced it. During the I thou, two people are at one, and at the same time, they remain discrete individuals of ultimate personal integrity. One does not lose oneself to the other in an I thou relationship. In the I thou relationship, there is I thou, and the I is real, and the thou is real, and that hyphen is real. And at the same time, we are wholly absorbed in that moment which blocks everything else in the world out. And after an I thou relationship, after an I thou moment, nothing is same in the relationship. We are bound, and we are bound in a way that we promise never to betray that I thou moment. Without any words, we know what we should do, what we must do, what we may never do without words, because we know what it is to be true to the I thou moment or to betray it, to be true to an I thou beloved or to betray. Buber says it happens with lovers, husbands and wives. It also happens between parents and children, with grandparents and grandchildren, and it happens very often between friends. And Buber cautions us. One can't make an I thou moment happen. To do so would be to try to manipulate the other person, making the other person into an it by very definition. One can only be open to the possibility of an I thou moment by noticing, really noticing the other person, by being vulnerable, by being aware of Chesed. Goldman tells one more story that speaks both about I thou and the symbol for this year, Chesed, and Gmilut Chasadim. He tells a story of rushing to catch a subway. And he's rushing down the stairs of the subway. And he's doing it at rush hour, and there are like 1 million people all rushing down the stairs of a subway. If you've ever been in New York, you know exactly what this is like. And it doesn't have to be New York. You're rushing for a train, and everybody's rushing down the same stairs. You want to get in that train before the train doors close and the train rolls away. And Goldman talks about how these 1 million people, of which he is one, are not only walking past what seems to be a homeless person, a person who is sort of curled up in a ball against one side of the stairwell. And everyone is rushing by this human being, this nefesh, this soul, curled up on the side of the subway stairwell. And he says, normally he would have rushed by too. But he was thinking about all the things he'd been talking about that day. And for some reason, he noticed. What he felt was everybody was going by as if the man wasn't there. The guy wasn't even being noticed. And Goldman noticed him. And surprising to himself, he stopped dead. And he bends down to this man in the stairwell to see what is the trouble, what is the problem, what is going on with this man. And Goldman says, the moment he stopped, everybody stopped. And they all gathered around this man. And it turns out something had physically happened and he collapsed. And one person said, I'll go get him water. Another person says, I'm going to call 911. Another person ran upstairs and got him a hot dog. And everyone suddenly was concerned for a person they had not noticed until someone did. Goldman's argument is, it's inside all of us. All of us will stop if we notice. All of us are looking for, more than anything in the world, I-thou relationships with other people. All of us are looking, more than anything in the world, to be a comfort, especially to someone we love, but even to someone just in need. Are these two people related? Is this someone who just happens to see another human being in need? It doesn't matter what the story is. It doesn't matter what any one of us would write. It's the same story. It's the story of seeing someone and understanding there is a part of us, whether you will call it a mirror neuron, whether you call it the Yetzer Tov, whether you call it the Nefesh, all of us want to do Chesed. All of us want to do Gmilut Chasadim. All we must do is notice. A moment ago, you heard Bill Krasnor read beautifully the English of today's Haftarah, in which we are asked, what does the fast mean to you? It is meaningless if it does not lead us all to want to stop and see the other, even if the other is not a Jew. Every other has a claim on us. And the Jewish tradition has faith in us that if we see, we will extend the hand, and we will be a comfort, and we will ease the pain, and we will vanquish the loneliness, and we will create an era and an aura of peace and harmony that puts us in harmony with the most divine in this universe. And we all say,
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS, the Jewish Broadcasting Service, with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to Jem, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.